The movie begins on a spaceship, MTS-42. It holds a crew of 3 people: Mission Commander Marina, biologist David, and medical researcher Zoe. They are on a 2-year mission to Mars and are tasked to conduct various research on its surface related to its habitation. The 3 nervously brace themselves as the countdown to the launch starts. After monumental turbulence, MTS-42 finally reaches its desired area in space. When the mission control confirms a successful launch, the upper stage of the ship is separated. It is connected to the ship's main hull by 450-meter-long tethers. This acts as a counterweight for inertia-based artificial gravity. Finally, the crew is allowed to take their seatbelts off, and Zoe leaps at the commander, congratulating her for the incredible launch. David, on the other hand, is suffering from motion sickness, but is just as excited. He has been working on research related to algae, which are supposed to generate oxygen on Mars. Being on MTS-42 is exciting for him, since he has dedicated his entire life to this research. The crew immediately starts working on the post-launch activity. Zoe reaches the magnetic hull while on a facility check and sees out the window for the first time. The view is incredible, which instantly turns the hull into her favorite spot on the ship. After dinner, the 3 are interviewed through a video conference where they get to tell the world about their launch experience. We find out that Zoe and David were chosen amongst thousands of researchers to be on the mission, and both are incredibly thankful to be getting the opportunity. 10 hours into the launch, and everything is going well. The commander is checking some minor defects in the ship when she finds a drop of blood on the floor. Confused and curious, she tries to take off the ceiling to see where it is coming from. To her utter surprise, a man falls down from the ceiling into her arms. He is injured and unconscious. Hence, before anything else, the crew brings him into the medbay and treats his wounds. Zoe stitches him up and predicts that he will wake up in a few hours. The commander finds the man's ID on the ground, and it turns out he is Michael, a support engineer who was helping Mission Control prompt MTS-42 for the launch. The crew thinks that Michael is a stowaway. The commander immediately contacts Mission Control and tells them about the problem at hand. Michael's identity is confirmed, but how he ended up on the ship is still a secret. Moreover, the commander gets a broken arm and is asked to rest for at least 6 weeks. To add to their problems, carbon dioxide in the air goes up by 3%. It turns out that when Michael fell from the ceiling, some damage was done to the CDRA, the device that is supposed to remove carbon dioxide from the ship. David accelerates emergency lithium hydroxide canisters to scrub CO2 from the air. However, this is not a permanent solution, and the crew's life relies on the poorly working CDRA. A few hours later, Michael wakes up in pain. He walks around the ship looking for people and ends up in the magnetic hull. The view outside the window makes him panic because he was unconscious during the launch. Zoe finds him and tries calming him down, but it doesn't work. The commander and David help her take Michael to another room. After a few minutes of breathing exercises, Michael finally calms down and starts explaining how he ended up there. It turns out he was doing a final check on the ship, but forgot to buckle himself and got hurt. He was in between the ship and the part of it that separates during the launch. This is why he ended up on the ceiling, where he remained unconscious for more than 12 hours before the commander found him. It finally hits Michael that he is going to be away from his young sister for 2 years until the mission ends. He freaks out and begs the crew to let him go back. However, there is no way the ship will return before the mission ends. Mission Control is informed of everything. The commander especially requests them to take care of Michael's sister until he returns. They agree to do so and place her in a special home where all her needs will be taken care of. Michael finally breathes a sigh of relief and focuses on helping the crew with their chores. At first, he thought he would be a burden to them, But he slowly realizes that he is welcome on the ship and can actually contribute to the mission because of his background in structural engineering. David still wonders if Michael's appearance was an accident or if he wanted recognition for being on the mission. But Zoe blows off the conversation because Michael's appearance isn't going to hurt anyone. The next day, she gives him a tour of the ship and explains all the emergency procedures. They reach the magnetic hull, and this time, Michael takes his time to admire the view. They also get to talk about his sister, Ava. Seeing Michael talk about his sister, Zoe knows that he is a nice person. Next, Michael is paired with David to ask him to enter data into the logs. He finds it strange that David listens to jazz music while working. The two bond over their opinion on jazz music. At the same time, the commander is worried about the rapidly increasing carbon dioxide level. She makes Zoe check the CDRA in hopes that they can fix it. However, the device seems to have fried sometime last night. It is beyond repair, which means they will soon suffocate to death if they don't find a way to produce more oxygen. The commander realizes the seriousness of the situation and immediately informs Mission Control. After brainstorming ideas to help the oxygen level, she remembers that David's algae may help, since their very job is to create oxygen on Mars. David argues that they won't work because they are still in the initial phase of the experiment. It will take years before they are able to create oxygen to support life on Mars. Moreover, if they waste the algae on the ship, they will have none to experiment on when they reach Mars. At last, the commander convinces him to use half of his batch because it is their only option. He does as told, hoping for the best. Somewhere else, Michael and Zoe take out the CDRA from the ceiling in hopes that they can fix it. But they soon find out that it is permanently ruined. While working, Michael's stitches come undone and he starts to bleed. He takes off his shirt and Zoe notices a nasty burn scar that runs down his body. Zoe is curious about how he got it, but doesn't say anything. The next day, David walks into his lab and is devastated to see the first batch of algae is dead. It was their only hope to maintain the correct oxygen to carbon dioxide ratio in the ship. With it gone, they will die of suffocation before they even reach their destination. The commander then remembers that there might be tanks of liquefied oxygen in the upper stage of the ship, but they will have to climb the 450-meter cable before they can reach it. It is too dangerous, so Mission Control doesn't allow it. After walking through every possible option, they collectively come to a decision. In the following scene, the commander calls Zoe and David for a meeting. She explains the situation to them and reveals that they only have enough oxygen for 3 people to reach Mars. If the 3 of them want to survive, they will have to sacrifice Michael's life. Zoe is horrified at the thought and wants the commander to think of another way. She declares that she is not doing anything unethical for the mission and convinces the captain to give Mission Control 10 days to think of an alternative solution. David also doesn't like the idea of killing Michael, but he is willing to do anything to save his research. The crew also decides to keep the information from Michael, since he is not trained to handle pressure in such situations. Later, the commander argues with Mission Control, asking for a 10-day period to think of an alternative. She wants the crew to be in the best mental condition for the rest of the trip, which won't be possible if they kill a person to survive. The next morning, David goes to the commander, suggesting they tell Michael about the situation, because the longer they wait, the more critical the situation becomes. The commander remains adamant about the 10-day waiting period, but doesn't stop David. Meanwhile, Michael tells Zoe that he got the scars on his body from an apartment fire. It happened when he was 9 and his sister was a baby. They were saved by their father, who lost his life in the accident. Zoe listens to the story and feels bad for Michael, especially in light of recent events. Later, David goes to Michael and tells him about the situation. Michael is horrified to have found out that he is the reason the crew's life and the entire mission are in danger. His shock multiplies when David hands him a vial of poison, suggesting he sacrifice his life for the crew. After David leaves, Michael falls into a spiral of thoughts. He leaves a video message for his sister and is seconds away from killing himself. Just then, Zoe finds him and convinces him to live. She is in disbelief that David could do something so horrible. The two get into an argument before Zoe storms off. She then makes it her mission to get the oxygen tanks from the upper part of the ship, even though climbing up there is extremely risky. She has trained both Michael and herself to build up their core strength so they can spacewalk and climb at the same time. The first hour of the training does not go well because Michael keeps slipping off the tether. Zoe realizes that she needs the commander and David's help and goes to talk to them. She is yet again met with another surprise when she reaches David's lab. It turns out that the second batch of his algae is also dead. This means that the MTS-42 only has enough oxygen for 2 people now. As the last resort, David and Zoe decide to climb to the upper part of the spaceship and get to the oxygen tanks. The mission finally starts, and they walk out of the airlock. When they reach the middle section, they have to be very careful not to break the solar panels, which are the only power source for the ship. After crossing the hurdle, they climb some more and finally reach the other side. David stays on top, while Zoe goes into the ship to find the oxygen supply. She successfully fills up the first tank before handing it to David and then filling up the second one. But just then a solar storm hits, and the two have to climb back to the ship immediately. They are climbing with a single tank roped in between them when suddenly a clip to the tether breaks and Zoe starts falling down rapidly. She tries her best to hold onto the oxygen tank, but it slips into space. The spaceship still only has enough oxygen for 2, and the crew loses its last hope. David suggests that they go up again and get the second tank of oxygen, but he is exhausted because of motion sickness and cannot go through with it. Zoe steps up and says that she will go out on her own. The others oppose it, but if she doesn't take a chance, 2 of them will die if she somehow gets the tank, and 1 of them will get enough oxygen to survive the trip. She goes out, even in the solar storm, and comes back with the tank as promised. At last, we see her looking at the commander through a glass window. The commander gives her a knowing look and nods. David and Michael are also crying inside the ship, as it turns out that Zoe has decided to sacrifice her life to save Michael. In the last scene, Zoe sits down, looking into space. The movie ends as she narrates that she is thankful she is there at that moment. If you enjoyed this movie recap, make sure to hit the like button. And if you want to see more of these, subscribe to the channel and check out our other videos.